I counted every single one. 1, 2, 3. By the time my daughter-in-law's words landed for the third time at my own dinner table, something inside me went completely still. Not broken, not shattered. Still. The way a building goes quiet right before the demolition crew pushes the button. My name is Walter Mercer. I am 67 years old. I spent 35 years as a forensic accountant in Dallas, Texas, untangling the financial lies of corporations, criminal enterprises, and con artists who thought numbers were just decoration. I know how to read a balance sheet the way most men read a map. I know where the money is hidden before the person hiding it even remembers they hid it. And this is the story of how I used every single one of those skills to dismantle my daughter-in-law's carefully constructed empire while my son sat at his desk downtown, eating a catered lunch, completely unaware that his wife had just made the worst financial decision of her life. If you have ever been humiliated by someone who smiled while doing it, if you have ever watched someone drain the people you love while calling it generosity, like this video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. It was Thanksgiving. My son Derek had called 3 weeks earlier. His voice, carrying that particular brightness that I had learned over 50 years, meant he wanted something. Dad, we are doing the big dinner this year. Bring your famous sweet potato casserole. Bring the good bourbon. And Dad, Kristen has been working really hard on decorating the place. So just, be supportive of whatever she has done with it. What she had done with it was spend $40,000 of my son's money turning a perfectly good house into something that belonged in a catalog. Nobody asked to be put on the mailing list for Seville. I knew the number because Derek had called me 3 weeks before that. Before the Thanksgiving call, asking in a low voice whether I could transfer some money into his account without Kristen knowing. Just a short-term thing. Dad, cash flow issue. We have a big bill coming in and the timing is just off. I had wired him $20,000. I told him it was a loan. He said, of course. I drove 2 hours from my apartment in Fort Worth. I parked my 12-year-old Buick in the driveway next to the new Range Rover and the new Lexus, both of which I recognized as additions from the past 6 months, both of which I had not been consulted about. I rang the doorbell of a house I had helped purchase the down payment for 6 years ago. I was carrying a casserole dish covered in foil and a bottle of bourbon that was worth more than my first month's rent in 1981. My daughter-in-law Kristen opened the door. She was 32. Beautiful in the way of someone who had made beauty into a full-time occupation, and she was wearing an expression I had seen on the faces of 100 financial fraudsters over the years. The expression that says, I am so happy you are here, while meaning I am so much smarter than you. Oh, Walter. She said my first name, not Dad. Never Dad. Not once in 3 years of marriage. You made it. Come in. Come in. She stood aside, and I stepped into a house that smelled of expensive candles and something roasting. The foyer had been completely redone. New tile. New light fixture. A console table that I recognized from an interior design magazine Derek had left at my apartment on his last visit. The price tag still on the back because no one in that house was careful enough to check. $1,200 for a table you put your keys on. Derek was in the kitchen. He looked good on the surface. My son. Tall and easy with his smile. But I know my boy the way I know a balance sheet. I see the stress lines. I see the way his shoulders ride up near his ears when the numbers are not adding up. He hugged me, and I felt the tension in his back. Good to see you. Dad, he said. Can I get you a drink? In a minute. I set the casserole down and looked at him. How are things? Great, he said. Too quickly. Really great. Kristen has been amazing with the house. You see the foyer custom tile. She found this artisan in Austin. $1,200 for a table. I thought again, but I smiled. I said it looks beautiful. Kristen's sister and her husband were already there. Two friends of Kristen's I had never met were there with their husbands. Nobody from my side of the family had been invited. Though my sister lived 40 minutes away, and my late wife's sister had called me 3 times in the past month, wondering when she would see Derek again. I had made the calls myself, gently explaining that Thanksgiving was a small gathering this year. Small. 8 people in a $40,000 redecorated house that had been paid for with loans and stress, and a $20,000 wire transfer from a 67-year-old man's retirement account. Dinner was fine until it wasn't. We were on the second bottle of wine when Kristen started talking about the investment she had been building to it. I could see that in retrospect. The same way I used to watch a subject in a deposition build toward the lie they had been rehearsing for 3 days. She had softened the table first with compliments about her own cooking, then with a long story about a friend who had made an absolute killing in short-term rentals. And then she looked directly at me. "Walter," she said. And the table went quiet. In that particular way, tables do. When someone is about to say something, they rehearsed. Derek and I have been looking at a property, a vacation rental down in Galveston. It is a really smart investment. The numbers are genuinely incredible. I looked at my son. He was looking at his plate. She kept going. "We are just a little short on the down payment. And with Derek's income and the projected rental revenue, we could absolutely carry the mortgage." She smiled. "We were hoping you might want to be part of it. As an investor. Obviously, we would pay you back from the rental income." I looked at her. I looked at Derek. "How short?" I said. $80,000. She said. Without blinking. The table was very quiet. Kristen's sister was looking at her wine glass. One of the friends was suddenly very interested in the centerpiece. I set down my fork. I picked up my bourbon. I took a slow sip and looked at my daughter-in-law. And I thought very carefully about what I knew and what I did not know. What I knew, Derek had called me 6 weeks ago, asking for $20,000 for a cash flow issue. Derek's shoulders were carrying a building's worth of stress. The house had been renovated for $40,000, and both new vehicles were leased. What I did not know yet was the full picture. But I had spent 35 years finding full pictures, and I had started looking for this one the day Derek made that first call. "That is a big number," I said pleasantly. "Let me think about it." Kristen's smile stayed on, but her eyes went somewhere colder. "Of course," she said. "No pressure." That was the first time. The second time was after dinner. When I was in the kitchen, helping Derek clean up, Kristen came in and shut the door behind her and said, in a voice with all the warmth removed, that she thought I was being selfish. She said she and Derek had worked very hard building their life, and that family was supposed to support family, and that she had been very patient with my attitude. I asked what attitude. She said that I made Derek feel guilty for having nice things. That every time he spent money on himself, she knew I had said something. That I was controlling, and that Derek was too afraid to tell me. Derek was standing at the sink. He did not turn around. That was the second time. The third time was when the guests were putting on their coats and Kristen, laughing at something her sister had said, remarked just loudly enough for everyone to hear that it must be nice to sit on a pile of money and decide who was worthy of it. She said it with a smile. She said it like a joke. She looked straight at me when she said it. I looked back at her. I did not say anything. I picked up my casserole dish. I kissed my son on the cheek. I said thank you for having me. I walked to my car and I sat in the driveway for a moment. And I reached into my coat pocket and I took out my phone. I dialed my accountant. A woman named Sandra who had worked with me for 20 years and who picked up on the second ring even on Thanksgiving because she was that kind of professional. "Sandra," I said, "I need you to pull everything we have on Derek's finances. Every loan I have made him. Every cosign. Every document. Pull the full picture." She was quiet for a moment. "How deep are we going?" Walter, I watched the lights of the house through the windshield. The shadow of my daughter-in-law moving past the kitchen window. All the way, I said. I drove home. I did not turn on the radio. I thought about the 35 years I had spent following money trails. And I thought about how the same patterns appear whether you are looking at a Fortune 500 company or a household budget. Money flows toward power. When the power shifts, the money reveals itself. And right now, in my son's house, the power had shifted to a woman who had called me controlling in my son's kitchen while my son stared at the sink. I was not angry. I was activated. Sandra sent me the documents by the following Monday. I sat at my kitchen table with my reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, and I went through everything the way I used to go through corporate audits. Line by line. Date by date. The first loan to Derek had been 4 years ago. $15,000 for a car repair and some dental work. He had paid back $8,000 of it, and we had never discussed the rest. The second had been 2 years ago. $30,000 that I had been told was for a business opportunity that he would tell me more about when it was further along. He had never told me more. The third had been 6 months ago. $20,000 for the cash flow issue. Total outstanding loans to my son, $57,000. I looked at the legal pad. I wrote that number down. Then I wrote down the estimate for the house renovation. Then the 2 vehicle leases. Then I did some math on the projected payments. Derek's salary as a regional manager at a logistics company was good but not elastic. It was not a salary that absorbed a $40,000 renovation and 2 new vehicle leases and $57,000 in outstanding family debt, without something somewhere starting to bow under the pressure. I called a friend of mine who worked in property records. I asked him to run Derek and Kristen's address. He called me back an hour later. There was a second mortgage on the house. It had been taken out 14 months ago. The amount was $95,000. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Sandra back and I told her what I needed to do next. What I needed to do next was confirm something I suspected but had not yet proven. Derek's company had a subsidiary that contracted through a vendor network. 3 years ago, at Kristen's suggestion, Derek had brought in a vendor for some logistics software. I had heard about this in passing at Christmas dinner. What I had not heard about, but what Sandra found when she dug through the corporate registration records, was that the software vendor was an LLC registered in Delaware 18 months before Derek brought them in. The registered agent of that LLC was Kristen's brother. The vendor had been paid $340,000 over 2.5 years. I put my pen down. I looked out my kitchen window at the Texas sky, and I thought about my son standing at the sink, not turning around. He did not know. I was certain of it. Derek was many things, but he was not a fraudster. He was a man who had married someone smarter and more dangerous than he realized, who had slowly rearranged his world until he could not see the walls that had been built around him. I went back to the documents. I was methodical. I was patient. I had time. What I found over the next 2 weeks was this. Kristen had been siphoning money through her brother's LLC from Derek's company for 2.5 years. The payments were structured carefully, just below the threshold that would trigger a routine audit flag. She had used some of it to fund the lifestyle, the renovations, the cars, but a significant portion, Sandra estimated around $180,000, had been moved into an account that was in Kristen's name alone. A rainy day fund. For a day that would come when she decided the marriage had run its course. I sat in my apartment and I thought about my son, and I thought about the Thanksgiving table, and I thought about her voice saying it must be nice to sit on a pile of money. She had been building an exit for 2 years while living on my son's salary and asking me for $80,000 more. I called my lawyer. His name is Frank Castellano, and he had been my attorney for 22 years. And when I laid out what I had found, he was quiet for a long time. Walter, he said finally, this is wire fraud. This is potentially embezzlement from the company. This is a significant criminal exposure for her. I know, I said. Does Derek know? Are you going to tell him? I thought about that carefully. Yes, I said. But not yet. First, I need to make sure the evidence is sealed and preserved. If she finds out someone is looking, she will move the money. Frank was quiet again. He had known me long enough to know that when I was quiet and methodical, I was more dangerous than when I was loud. How do you want to handle this? Walter, I want to protect my son, I said. And then I want to watch the walls come down on everything she built. Frank started making calls. The next step took 3 weeks. Frank worked with a corporate attorney who specialized in fraud recovery. They built a document package. They contacted Derek's company compliance department through a confidential tip channel, something I had specifically requested so that Derek would not be implicated in the report. The compliance team opened an internal investigation. Frank filed a civil fraud claim on my behalf for the recovery of the outstanding loans, citing the fraudulent inducement of the Thanksgiving request as part of a pattern of financial manipulation. And then I called my son. It was a Sunday morning. I drove to his house unannounced for the first time in 3 years. I rang the doorbell. Derek answered in his robe, surprised, and I could see Kristen behind him in the kitchen, her expression shifting from startled to watchful. I need to talk to you, I said to my son. Alone. We sat in his truck in the driveway for an hour. I laid out everything I had found. I did it the way I used to present findings to federal investigators. Clearly, chronologically, with documentation. I watched my son's face move through confusion and then disbelief, and then something that was very painful to witness, the recognition of a person who realizes they have been living inside a lie that was built specifically around them. He was silent for a long time when I finished. Dad, he said. His voice was very small. How long has this been going on? At least 2.5 years, I said. Probably longer. He pressed his fist against his mouth. He looked out the windshield at the house, at the Range Rover parked in front of it. I paid for that car, he said quietly. I thought I was paying for that car. You were, I said. You and the vendor contract, and the second mortgage. She was building a runway. And she was going to use it. He started to cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the slow, wrecked tears of a man who is doing the math for the first time on something that does not add up and never will. I put my hand on his arm. I let him sit with it. Here is what happens next, I said after a while. And I told him what happened next was swift and precise and entirely legal. On a Tuesday morning, while Kristen was at a yoga class that charged $180 a month billed to an account I had flagged for the civil suit, Derek went to the house. He was not alone. He brought Frank and a moving company I had hired. He brought a locksmith. He brought a document that Frank had prepared. A formal notice of intent to separate, naming the civil fraud claim as a related proceeding. Kristen came home to a house with changed locks and a notice taped to the door. Her personal items had been carefully packed and placed in a storage unit, the address of which was included in the notice. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been thrown away. Everything had been handled with the kind of precision that tells a person the other side has been planning this for longer than they realized. Her first call was to Derek. He did not answer. Her second call was to her brother. The brother, who had been contacted the previous day by the company's legal team and was currently weighing his own exposure, did not answer either. Her third call was to me. He let it ring. I was sitting in my kitchen eating toast and drinking coffee, and I looked at the phone and I let it ring. She called again. I answered on the fourth ring. Walter, she said, and her voice was doing something I had heard in depositions. A controlled fury, pretending to be calm. What did you do? You had no right. You cannot just go through our finances. That is an invasion of privacy. Derek would never have agreed to this without you manipulating him. I sipped my coffee. I waited until she was done. Christine. I said, I am a forensic accountant. I have spent 35 years finding money that people tried to hide. I found yours in about 3 weeks. I want you to understand that this was not difficult for me. She was quiet. The civil complaint has been filed. I continued. The company compliance investigation is open. The wire transfer records and the LLC registration are preserved and documented. Your brother's attorney has already called Frank. I would suggest you call your own attorney before you call me again. She hung up. I set the phone down on the table. I finished my toast. Derek moved into my apartment for 6 weeks while everything processed. He was quiet for most of that time, which was appropriate. He had a lot to process. He went to work every day. He cooperated fully with the compliance investigation, which cleared him of any knowledge or participation in the fraud. He started seeing a therapist on Thursdays, which I had gently suggested, and which he had initially resisted, and then embraced. We watched football on Sundays. I made the sweet potato casserole once. Just the two of us. On a Tuesday for no reason. He told me about a woman he had worked with years ago. Before Kristen, who he had always regretted not calling back. He laughed a little when he said it. The laugh sounded like him. Like my son before the last 3 years. The civil suit settled 4 months later. Kristen's attorney negotiated a recovery of the outstanding loans, plus a portion of the diverted funds. It was not everything, but it was enough. The company reached a separate settlement with the brothers LLC. Kristen avoided criminal charges in exchange for full cooperation and repayment terms that would follow her for a very long time. She moved back to Phoenix, where she was from. I heard this from Derek, who heard it from a mutual contact. He said it with no particular emotion, which seemed healthy to me. The second mortgage on the house was manageable once the other cash drains were removed. Derek kept the house. He refinanced it. He started paying me back $200 a month, which I had not asked for, and which I accepted because I knew it was important to him. On a Saturday in April, I was sitting on my apartment balcony watching the Fort Worth skyline when my phone rang. It was Derek. Hey. Dad. You busy? Never for you. I said. I talked to that woman. He said. From before. We got coffee. He paused. She is really good. Dad. She asked about you. I think she wants to meet you at some point. I smiled at the skyline. That would be nice. So, there was a quiet between us that was not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that has been earned. Dad, he said finally. I should have listened to you more. About a lot of things. You listened plenty. I said, you just had to learn some things yourself. That is how it works. He laughed. And it sounded like him again. Fully like him. And I thought about 35 years of following money trails. And I thought about how the trail had eventually led right back here. To this phone call. To this quiet afternoon. To this. We do not always mistake cruelty for love. Sometimes we mistake tolerance for love. We absorb the small humiliations because we do not want to see what they add up to. We look the other way at the second mortgage and the vendor contract and the Thanksgiving table because seeing clearly would require us to act. And acting might cost us something we are not ready to lose. But here is what I learned. Late and at some expense. Clarity is not cruelty. Protecting your son with the truth is not betrayal. And sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is simply open the books. Follow every number to where it leads. And let the math speak for itself. The numbers never lie. People lie. The numbers just wait until someone patient enough comes along to read them. If this story hit home for you, hit that like button and subscribe to Father's Peaceful Revenge. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And tell me if you have ever had to open your eyes to something you already knew was there. I read every single one.